But no, it's like we have to take some real world examples from different countries or different provinces, at least in our Canada, and learn from them and do better in our province here.
Yeah, listen, you got little Italy. Why not go over to Italy and see, hey, what are they doing in Rome that's probably a bad example because you got shit built 500 years ago. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Mark Loeffler Experience. We got Henry Rojas from Rojas Empire Designs with us today. We're talking zoning. We're talking how about much the governments are idiots. I got enough gray hairs. I don't need more. I think I'd lose my hair if I did development in Ontario. Yeah.
Honestly, we talk about to do another building like what we're doing right now. I think we both get gray hairs in a few weeks.
Well, you just keep it short on the side so nobody can see it.
I get more haircuts that way, yeah.
Yeah. Smash the like button. Comment down below. Where are you investing? Enjoy. Henry Rojas, buddy. Finally got you on the show. You're a busy man.
Honestly, yeah, it's been a busy time this year, especially with summer kicking in and everybody starting to work on everything they wanted to do. It's been crazy.
For those of you guys who don't know, Henry has a design studio, Rojas Designs. Is that the full name of it?
Well, I'm trying to shorten it, but it's Rojas Empire Design, yes.
Okay, so red. And he does a lot of buildings for investors, triplexes, eightplexes, 10 new builds, everything like that, correct?
Yeah, we're trying to settle down from like 2 to like 100, but try and find that missing middle type of thing with 30 units, give or take.
So you're trying to narrow it down from 2 units to 100 units.
Yeah, just try to shorten it down.
Shorten it down from those. Because those 200 unit buildings, you don't want those.
They're definitely a lot of work for sure, but there's some pros and cons to those buildings.
Yeah. All right, well, let's just talk like right up front. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see people make when they're buying that they're going to redevelop a property?
Yeah, so the most common problem lately from new investors is that the zoning issue, right? They find a property, it looks great on paper, it looks great from the first site visit, and then they don't understand that you're allowed to do a duplex, but then there's some situations in some cities where you're limited to how much you can build in that building right there.
So you're trying to tell me that in Ontario, it's hard to maybe build rentals?
It's a little bit challenging, that's for sure. It's not a walk in the park.
It's not cut and dry.
No, there's so much things to go around that. It's interpretation with every city. They have their own different way of thinking.
And we wonder why we have a housing problem in Ontario.
Yeah, you'd assume so. You assume they'd be on the same page, but they're all like, I have a different thought process. And from Hamilton versus like Toronto, for example, they have different sort of mindsets.
Yeah. Well, and then you got St. Catharines, different than Hamilton and different from Toronto. They're not even, is there anyone that actually is kind of like together? Like you can say, oh, like Hamilton's like Waterloo or Kitchener or London, or
there are some pockets in some areas. Like we can compare like Niagara Falls to London. Like they're very similar in terms of their mindset of zoning, right? Or Hamilton to Bradford. Like they're very similar minded. But you would assume like Mississauga and Brampton would be very similar minded. They're not. They're very different.
No. Yeah, I can imagine that for sure. Well, so let's just ask, what are the easiest municipalities to deal with in terms of zoning and getting the process through and speed of action and all that type of stuff?
I would say it's the little towns. The little cities are away from like the GTA core. London's been very friendly to us. They've been very direct in their understanding of their bylaws. Anywhere from like Windsor, they're very understanding too. So anywhere away from the GTA seems to be a little bit easier to deal with. Even up in Barrie, they're somewhat easier to deal with.
All right, so now that we know where we're going to invest, what's the highest return you're seeing your investors making on the projects they're doing? Like, is it a duplex conversion? Is it buying raw land and building 20, 30 units? Like, what are you seeing the highest and best use?
So far, since the Bill 23 was released last year and now in effect this year.
So, okay, let's best use.
Highest and best use, we're seeing like more of the 5plex, 6plex, 7plex. Anything above 5, that's where most of our investors are going into for the commercial financing. A lot of times with the triplex and fourplexes, there's a lot more complications versus like a duplex, which are not accounted for. And so the cost for construction and timing is not really worth it at the end. So they're moving towards the 5+ units.
Yeah. And where are you seeing those get built?
We're seeing most of them get built, at least in St. Thomas near London. We're seeing a lot of them. Well, now recently with Toronto, a lot of investors have been coming to me with questions about, can I do a 4-unit plus a garden suite? They're more active there. There's a recent video, some designer and some investor did a 5plex side by side on the same property. So they already have 10 units on that one little land. So that's becoming very popular now.
So what kind of frontage did they have to make that?
I believe they had 40 feet or so. It wasn't very large, but they went narrow.
Well, it's so funny because in Alberta, if you guys watch the show, I talk about Alberta a lot because I'm invested there. You can buy a 50-foot lot and put 8 to 10 units on it. Basically, they do row housing, and it's a 3-bedroom up top and a 1-bedroom basement or 2-bedroom basement apartments. But you can do that on any lot. So where is that happening in Toronto?
We're seeing those in more of the downtown areas where we had the existing buildings was that small type of lot area. That's where they're trying to push in for more units. Not the 3 bedrooms like Alberta, but at least get 1 bedroom. Worst comes to worst, bachelor style units. But we wish we had lots like Alberta here. You do. You have them at Avenue Road in Lawrence and stuff like that, but they're basically making McMansions up there, right? Yeah.
Like that's what they're doing. We have them in Oakville. Like, I don't know, I've been on a couple 100-foot wide lots and stuff like that. But this would never get built there because the neighbors would be in an uproar.
Yeah, and at least downtown Oakville. I worked there a couple of years ago for Custom Homes, and they have their own little community there.
Oh yeah. Like that, and that's one of the issues I think in the housing crisis is great. We have all this land, and we do have a lot of land, and we could build, on a 100-foot lot, 2 rows of 5 townhouses, make 20 units, and livable units that families could rent at 3 bedrooms. But that'll never happen.
No, it's like only these like little pockets you see. At least myself, I see in Mississauga that they're actually developing these like 3-story townhomes. And add in like 100 plus like the townhomes in that one little area. You would assume like there's not enough space, but it's doable. It is. It's just wherever you have to be very site specific.
Well, I mean, you got a 40-foot lot. If you let them go right to the lot line, like they can put like 10-foot wide properties on, right?
Yes. So it is possible. It's just we have to find the land in the right city to work with. Like City of St. Catharines, we're working on the 12-plex with Taco right there, and you can imagine like the struggles we're dealing with in that area. It's not easy, and just for 12 units.
So he said on this show that he thinks he's going to be building by the fall.
I would say, yeah, that's fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah. I've been in contact with the city most of the time, and then communication with them. So I would say that's a fair point.
That's a fair estimation.
Yes.
Okay.
We're at that finish line. It's just like some minor little comments from the city that we've already addressing right now. We're just waiting for that.
Didn't he have to pay for some study or something? Was it?
Yeah, there was
one.
Yeah, there was like a traffic parking study, which again, parking is always the issue with all these like increasing density. You need to have 1 parking space per unit, which is not feasible for a lot of like these lots.
It's not feasible. Most people don't have cars now, and in the future, less people are going to have cars.
Oh, 100%. All the light rail systems that we're having here, it's like might as well just take out the car.
We're going to have autonomous drivers, so you don't have to pay someone. And comment down below if you think that's going to happen in your near future. I mean, it's happening in San Francisco right now.
Oh, that's perfect.
Apparently, if you put a banana on the hood or something, the people are fighting this, right? They don't like the automation. Put a banana on the hood of the car, it disables it.
Wow.
So these activists are going around putting bananas on the hoods of these cars and deactivating them.
Man, we're trying to advance our technology a little bit, and people are just like slowing us down a little bit.
We can go down that rabbit hole, but let's talk about Bill 23 first.
For sure, definitely. It's a common question we're getting since January this year.
Yeah, so Bill 23 is an initiative by the Ontario government. Could be called Doug Ford's bill. What is it, and what should it do, and what is it doing?
Yeah, so the most common traits from Bill 23 that people can take away from it, it's like you can do up to 10 units, 10 residential units without going through site plan control. So we had done our 12-plex beforehand and maybe done 10 instead. We could have just bypassed this whole year and a half situation we're in right now. So up to 10 units, no more site plan control, you can go straight for building permits. However, if you have 1 commercial unit in that proposal, then it goes straight to site plan control. So there's a little bit of playing around with the zone in there. Next, community adjustments, right? A lot of times, the investors are worried about adding more density for your units, and then the neighbors are going to complain. With Bill 23, that no longer happens anymore. The neighbors can no longer complain too much, only just city representatives. And then development charges, they're a lot more cheaper now than they were before, depending on how many bedrooms you add to the units, right? So there's a lot of benefits with Bill 23. The issue is, even though it's like a provincial sort of, bill, a lot of cities.
Let's call it a mandate, even.
A lot of cities are having a lot of slowdown there, trying to add that into their bylaws. They're like, oh, we know it's there, but we have a year to kind of put it into our systems, right?
So it's obviously not fully integrated yet. And do you think it will be in a year?
Well, it's almost been about a year, so it's like November this year should be about a year, give or take. So a lot of cities have been very supportive on that. Hamilton was on top of that long before Bill 23. They allowed 4 units and development, exemptions.
Yeah.
Right? Toronto does the 5 units right now. So there are, like, the major cities are going into it. It's the little cities are having a little bit, back and forth.
Well, I mean, just 2 cases I know in Hamilton, because I was at the city council meeting when I was, the first time we were fighting not rent control, rental licensing in Hamilton. Somebody was there. They were proposing to build a 6-unit property, and the neighbors were arguing that no, they shouldn't build a 6-unit property there because the basement's a unit. They're just going to end up putting more units there. And I'm like, why shouldn't they? Like, it helps everybody. Like Acorn's fighting against this. I'm like, no, you want more units. The more units you have, and this is the problem, the mentality is, oh, well, we have to restrict these people profiting. And it's like, no, if you just let the floodgates open and let people build and add units, and I mean, within reason, obviously, building permits and up to stuff like safety standards and that, well, rent prices will come down.
I would say so. There's more in the market, at least at that point.
Right. Like, I mean, you look at Alberta, they've had a huge influx of people, right? Huge. If we saw that same number of percentage increase in Ontario, rent prices would go through the roof, right? But in Alberta, they've gone up maybe 5-6%.
This is why we have to follow a lot from, like, Alberta's example here. If we follow a little bit from them, we'd be doing a little bit better.
Oh, geez, if they followed 10%, they'd be doing better. I don't think, maybe they're at 2%.
Oh. We still got a long way to go there.
But that's like one of my fears as an investor from Ontario going to Alberta is I know that they can build. I know that they can add units so that the rent will stay down where they are. So I got to make sure I'm buying right.
100%.
Like, I got to make sure of my numbers more. Like in Ontario, I can be a jackass, buy any building. Okay, the guy renting for $700 leaves. I don't even need to renovate the unit. I'm getting $1,600, $1,700. If I renovate it, maybe I get $2,000. Right?
No, 100%.
So I don't have to be a genius. I just got to take the action and buy the building and then hold it long enough that people leave.
Yeah, no, if we follow a little bit more from Alberta's example, we have more units, a little bit faster rates. And in Ontario, yeah, you just buy something and hold it. It's eventually going to turn around.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, again, I harp on this a lot. People talk about Canadian real estate, right? And even just in this conversation, okay, we've talked about Ontario, Alberta, and they're two totally, like one might be Mars, one might be Jupiter, right? And then you talk about, okay, then let's talk about Ontario real estate, and then you've said, oh, well, dealing with the city of Toronto, dealing with this, dealing with these places are all different.
Yeah.
So it's like, as an investor, like, obviously, in Ontario, I think if you're very specific on your area, you get to know that area very well, whether it's Belleville, Kingston, Hamilton, you know the rules around it. That's why it's kind of harder to go down to the next town and say, oh, I'm going to do the exact same thing here as I did there.
Yeah, that's not the case. Like, you would assume they follow the same rules, but again, interpretation, it doesn't really go well 90% of the time.
That's why you work with an expert like yourself who has obviously working in those areas and drilling down and being like, well, you're looking at that property. Here's what we did on this other property around the corner. So just take that in mind while you're negotiating or doing whatever you're doing.
Which is a very common question we get from at least the Hamilton investors that are trying to move out a little bit to the outside cities. They're like, oh, I'll just do the same thing from Hamilton. No, the city operates a little bit differently, right? You have to do a little bit more or a little bit less depending on the situation. But again, you would assume the same sort of Ontario should be the same sort of rules. They're not. So
yeah,
just like I'd like to emphasize that every time being a new investor, right? It's not the same.
I mean, that kind of just drives me nuts.
It does. It's ridiculous.
Like, I mean, I follow the KISS principle. Keep it simple. And we've gone way over keep it simple.
Yeah, it's not. It gets very complicated, especially now.
Yeah, and again, that's one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons we have a housing crisis in Ontario.
It slows down, that's for sure, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of interpretation, like some issues between, like, we get through the city and then the inspector comes on site with the contractor and they have a different mindset too.
Oh, right? Yeah, you have your permits and you get this inspector coming through and they're like, oh, you can't do it like that. And you're like, my permit says this.
Yes.
And then you got to go get an engineer stamp because then the inspector will be like, oh, well, I have no liability.
Yeah, 100%. And we see that so common now. It's just like, because they're saying that basically the guys at the city hall, they see paper. That's all they see. They don't know what the building looks like. So when the inspector gets out there, they see everything. So you can't really hide any information there. and then that's where interpretation comes around, right? They try to play it fair, but at the same time, they're trying to cover their own asses there, right?
Yeah, they don't want liability.
100%. But that slows down because now you're waiting for the engineer to get back to you. You're sending it back to the inspector. You have to inspect another date after 2 or 3 days, come back again, just to answer a question that could have been resolved before, right? So that's what's slowing down a lot of our process, at least now in the summertime. That's what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. Just, there's fires everywhere because interpretation there.
Yeah. And again, so now you're talking about a separate issue. Okay, we went through all this sludge, and finally we got permits. And now we got to deal with
inspector. Yeah.
I was going to use a bad word, and then I was going to use a different word. And I'm like, I don't know if I can say Nazi on YouTube without getting flagged.
Challenging people. That's what I go with.
Yeah, little people who, Anyways, small-minded people who have a narrow focus. They don't see they just don't see the bigger picture, right? That's obviously the little thinking, right? They don't see the bigger picture of how this then slows down the cog. It's like the butterfly effect, right? Like you're in traffic and you got that guy doing in the fast lane 90. So then somebody coming up doing 120 slams on the brake and that causes a traffic jam 3 miles back.
Yes.
Right? It's the exact same thing. So you have all these butterfly effects going on in real estate in Ontario where it's like, okay, site plan approval. Boom. Okay. Now, building permit approval.
Yeah.
And then, we got it all. We've done all this stuff. And then now you get little-minded people coming through saying, hey, no, we need this. And then, you're saying, hey, it's correct. And they're saying, no, well, it could not be. And you're like, could not be? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. And then at that point, it's just more of a discussion, debate, negotiating with the city.
And then it's like, well, I'm going to spend $1,000, get an engineer to sign this and stamp it. And then the guy's like, okay.
Yeah. Which a lot of times with the middle and higher end investors, that's fine. And they're somewhat okay with it. But the newer investors are getting into the market, it makes them feel very discouraged. It's like, it's my first duplex, my first triplex, my first fourplex. And seeing all these little speed bumps in the way, they just start telling me I'm not going to do this again.
Wow.
It's not for me.
There's a reason I don't do development in Ontario.
Yeah, there's a big reason.
I got enough gray hairs. I don't need more. I think I'd lose my hair if I did development in Ontario.
Honestly, yeah, I think that's why a lot of people are struggling with Ontario's sort of red tape on certain items, right?
Yeah.
Honestly, if me and Talk got to do another building like what we're doing right now, I think we both get gray hairs in a few weeks.
Yeah. Well, you just keep it short on the side so nobody can see it.
I get more haircuts that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So obviously we've talked about GTA and surrounding areas, but it's pretty expensive to buy stuff there. So that 40-foot lot that the guy's going to build an 8 to 10 unit on. What did that cost him?
The numbers, I'm not too familiar with that one, actually, right?
Okay.
They were just telling us, they spent a good amount of money there renovating from top to bottom. They fully gutted the property there, right? So,
yeah.
And they had a firewall between the 2 units, so actually 2 separate lots, technically.
Okay.
With 5 units each, which, that's the maximum in Toronto, right?
Yeah.
But they did that long before the approval for the 5-plex, so they had a little bit more struggles than we would have now.
Yeah.
Right.
But I'm sure to buy those 2 properties, they were 2.5 minimum.
Minimum, right? It's $1 million for each lot.
And then you got then you look at it and say, all right, I'm building these 5 units, and their costs, they're probably another $200 a unit, I would imagine.
I would say so, yeah.
Right, so you got another $1 million. So they're in for, they get a 10-plex in Toronto for 4.5 to 5 million after all costs and transfer taxes and all this type of shit.
Yeah.
So $5 million, you're $500,000 a unit for a new build property in Toronto. Now, granted, they probably don't have rent control.
No, because they're all brand new.
Until another government comes in and changes that, by the way.
Yeah.
Right? And then, so obviously investors always look for highest and best use and return on investment. So what other areas do you think investors are looking at right now, other than, say, trying to do that in Toronto for $5 million?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of these, let's say, for example, I'm getting a lot of requests in London area. The London area or outside London, St. Thomas, that's another one. They're very easygoing in terms of the 5+ units. It's just, these buildings are a little bit challenging to deal with. Again, similar to Hamilton, where you have to renovate almost everything.
Are they buying 100-year-old homes and turning them into 5 units?
That's the idea. That's the idea that they're trying to do, right? Again, there's a lot of work to it's cheap, it's big enough, but there's a lot of construction work and cost into that, so it's
well, you basically got to gut the building.
Oh, 100%. That's what we did.
New floor systems, new everything. I don't know. Do you work with George Almasri at all?
No, no.
Okay, because they're doing that in Hamilton. They put new floors in, they put new everything in. You're doing this on like the one of the worst streets in Hamilton. Like I get it, but I don't see your end value right now. Like I just don't. Like, and they'll rent it, but they're gonna have like constant tenant turnover there.
Yes. And that's where they have to work with experts like yourself, where they're familiar with the Hamilton area and where to invest money or what to spend money on. You have to be smart with your money. Everything is a cost.
Yeah.
Right? Is it worth it to redo all the floors? Is it worth it to redo the kitchen? Right? You have to understand that area and that specific needs. Right? And that's where we're seeing some struggles with some investors. Like, hey Henry, I want to do all this stuff. I'm like, half the things you want to do is going to cost you an arm and a leg. From my point of view, I'm not even a contractor, but I'll send you to Taco and see his point of thoughts. But he'll probably have similar sort of concerns as well.
So obviously yesterday we had an interest rate increase. I mean, this video is not going to come out until another week from now or whatever. Anyways, but so we had an interest rate increase yesterday. You know, with all these, like I'm going to call it the butterfly effect in Ontario real estate that's causing the traffic jam. I think this only makes the problem worse. Like this only like there was a stat I was reading about that said that mortgage interest on housing was causing inflation to like it was like 30% of the inflation cost. So if they just lowered the price of interest, like we'd hit our target.
Yeah, we'd be a little bit better off.
We'd be below 3% for inflation. So they're trying to use this, and I know the Bank of Canada says this. They don't care about the housing market. And I agree, they shouldn't care about the housing market. But they have this lever that they're using. That's the only lever they have, by the way. Only lever they have. And they're using it, and they're using it to mallet and hammering it. If they're using this mallet and hammering it, and like the nail or whatever is not moving, they got to think of something different, don't they? Like, what's your opinion on that? I know you're an architect, and this is more economics and broader thing, but you must have an opinion on this.
Well, like, in my opinion here, it's just like the higher the interest rates, the more difficult it is for a lot of people in the industry right now. Not just investors, but even your day-to-day people right now. They're struggling. That's why they even did the grocery rebate recently, right?
Which, no offense, that money will just flow back into the economy, which raises inflation.
So not really a solution at that point.
But I just put the video out yesterday about the grocery, how they're talking about how like the big supermarkets are colluding and stuff like that. And you look at it and they're making a 3.6% net profit. Would you run your business if you only made a 3.6% net profit?
No, it's not enough sometimes.
No. Right. And then they're saying, well, why isn't there competition? I'm like, they're only making 3.6% net profit. And I think like Ontario government, I think gets this. Like at least the current party we have they want development. Do you know why they want development?
Not too familiar with them. Like what's
well, number one, there is a housing crisis. They want to fix it, ish. But they want to keep the problem because they bank so much money on development. I think 40 or 35 or 40 cents of every dollar in development goes to the one form of government, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal.
Well, that explains the high development charges there.
Well, that's so it's development charges, land transfer taxes, GST, HST, permitting, all these types of things, right? Like, so 35 to 40, like, so we look at these developers and say, oh, they're going to get rich. Well,
not really. Like,
they're going to make some money, but who's getting rich here? Let's look at this.
Who's like the passive investor? Who's a working investor at that point, right?
Well, that's right. So this passive investor is making all this money. So if they really wanted to fix the problem, they would cut those.
Oh, 100%.
They would say, the provincial government could say to them, okay, we can't do anything about the HST. Well, they could take off the 8%,
Yeah.
right? Right off, they could do that. They could say to the cities, okay, we're going to pay the development charges.
Yeah, which they should, which they have reduced a little bit because of Bill 23, but still a large amount per unit.
But if they wanted to subsidize it, that's how they should subsidize it. They should say, okay, we're going to pay the development charges.
Yeah, they should. They would help out like at least the newer like small-time investors.
Yeah, I mean, that might help out in Toronto. Like, you're going to see more towers if they could say, okay, we're going to pay development charges for everyone building purpose-built rental.
And then solve the problem and just get more bills.
Yeah, but even then, like, they just need more places for people to live, right? Like, whether it's condos or whatever it is, there's not enough housing for everybody moving into Ontario right now.
Yeah, there's not enough. Like you see like Toronto, and that's why you have like the missing middle type of issue already. Like you have all these houses beside condos. There's not enough of these like mass like mid-level apartment buildings enough for people to house people.
Yeah, they need to build 6-story buildings, 6-story walk-ups, like most major cities have. And at least then you have still community, you have all this, you don't have these big condo towers that are, well, these 15-minute cities, right? You don't have to leave your condo. Like,
Right.
I know people who live downtown Toronto, they basically ever have to get out of their pajamas. They go down to the path, they walk to work, like the grocery stores in there, they never have to see sunlight.
Yeah, no, everything's like built in a certain way that's you don't have to leave your actual building itself, right?
Yeah.
And that's very convenient for them, for sure.
Well, it's convenient, but I don't know if that's a way to live. But
No.
I mean, I don't. Again, this is just one man's opinion on YouTube. But like, let's look at let's take some lessons from Alberta. Okay, let's go take some lessons from some European cities. Let's go look at them and see what they've done. What can we model to make sure that we're fixing our housing crisis? That's what I would be doing.
The only problem is, again, we're fighting against some cities. You have the problems to deal with, and then you have some cities to deal with. That's the biggest issue here. But no, it's like we have to take some real world examples from different countries or different provinces, at least in our Canada, and learn from them and do better in our province here.
Yeah, like I mean, listen, you got little Italy. Why not go over to Italy and see, hey, what are they doing in Rome to? I mean, that's probably a bad example because you got shit built 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago,
Quality
that's still standing. But like, I mean, you could go and look and say, okay, major cities in the world that are experiencing population increase, what have they done to house people? Oh, they build a lot of 5-6-story buildings.
Yes, which like solves a problem there. But not all cities are thinking similar minded like that. Like I think it was I was speaking to somebody a couple weeks ago. I think it was Paris, Ontario, that had a bunch of these like 4, 5, 6 unit, like 5 stories buildings were already built in like a downtown area. Like they already thought about that like years before, right? They're not like Toronto, but they had these middle class houses.
Go to New York City. You have 4 or 5-story brownstones.
Exactly.
And you have 2, 3-bedroom apartments on every floor, and they're massive. And they're beautiful, right? And some of them have been renovated to single family homes or whatever, but there's still a lot of units in those brownstones.
No, definitely, right?
And they're in nice neighborhoods. At least
100%.
now.
Yeah, well, they're getting better.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
But Toronto's got to like update a little bit more on that end. At least take out a little bit of the red tape so we can develop a little bit easier, I would say.
Anything else you want to cover?
Not particular. No, I think we covered most of the bases there.
Yeah.
Right?
Henry, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm sure the listeners and watchers got so much value out of that. Like I know I did. I learned a few things there. So, hey, everyone go back, rewatch it, reach out to Henry, and we'll get his details and we'll pop them down below. I think the best way, you have a Discord chat and Instagram is where to find you. I mean, that's how I hang out with you. So we'll pop that down below so everyone can go and learn from this smart guy.